Hello, everyone. On today's podcast episode, I'm going to talk about a news article that I read earlier about a guy who murdered his girlfriend. Yeah, he murdered his girlfriend, right? And then after he murdered his girlfriend, he went to ChatGPT and asked her, how do I get rid of? He asked ChatGPT, how do I get rid of a body? You know. And we only found out about this because the cops told us about it, and it brought me to the point of this podcast. I always found it weird that cops always tell exactly how they commit, how they find the people that are the criminals. One of the things that when I grew up, I usually thought that cops had like a secret network, a secret way of finding out criminals from watching TV shows and movies. But as I grew up, I started to realize that either the cops are lying, they're just they're throwing out let's just call it decoys. Either they're throwing out decoys to trick you into thinking that's how they solve their crimes, or they actually did solve the crimes that way. Because sometimes so you haven't watched the news when the cops tell you that hey, we found out about this criminal because of the text that he was sending to others, because of he was doing this with technology. He was calling on the phone, or we found the criminal through GPS. Don't you find it weird that the cops are telling on themselves? Maybe they have to. Maybe it's probably because maybe there's a policy that I'm not aware of. There probably is. Some states really have strict policies, governing cops and how they mete out justice, and how they get criminals, how they solve crimes. So maybe it's part of a policy that tells cops to tell every citizen how they've been caught. But the problem with that is, if the cops are always telling people how how they find criminals, the other criminals who have no idea, there's so many people in this world that have no idea how technology works. They have no idea how ChatGPT works. They don't even know that when they're talking to ChatGPT, they're actually talking to, the cops can easily get that information from them. When they're texting on the phone, using whatever app they're using, the cops can easily intercept, their messages, or if they're not paying attention to them, come back later on, and they got those texts that they've made with whoever they're making the text with. So everything you do online, almost everything you do with technology, the cops can easily get to it. But there's so many people in this world, that don't know that. So every time the cops come out and tell everyone that, hey, we got this, we figured this crime out through ChatGPT. We figured this crime out through, your text messages. We figured this crime out through cameras, hidden the cameras on the streets that are monitoring you. We figured out this text message. We figured out this crime through your calls. We were recording your calls without your permission. So we figured out how you committed your crimes through calls. Every time they do that, they're actually letting up future criminals, or the criminals that are already there, people that are already criminals. They're letting them know how the cops solve their crimes. So the cops are doing the equal opposite. They're solving crimes, right? But then the next time, because they've let everybody know how they solve the crime, right? The next crime they solve becomes harder. Why? Because now the future criminals know, the future criminals that have read your text, that have read the news articles that talk about that shows you bragging about how you caught the criminal. Now these people know exactly how you caught that criminal, and they'll try to avoid using those methods. So either you're using those methods, just to trick people into thinking, you know, into thinking that that's how you catch, criminals, but you're actually using a different method. Or you're actually trying to stop criminals. You're actually trying to teach criminals how to prevent them from being caught. Because if the criminals know you're using, you're monitoring their text, guess what? They'll stop texting when they want to commit the crimes. When criminals know that you're monitoring ChatGPT, guess what? They'll stop using ChatGPT when they're committing crimes. So it makes it harder for you, because now the criminals know exactly how you caught the last criminal. So they know how you caught the last criminal. The smart ones, will not make the same mistakes as the last one, while the dumb ones will still make the same mistake, thinking, hey, you will never catch them anyways. It's hard for you to prove, blah blah blah. Or they'll never figure out that I committed a crime anyway. So why would they come and check me? Why would they come and check my ChatGPT? But every time the cops come and monitor, come and say exactly how they committed, they found a person or they found clues to a case or to a crime, it does the opposite of what they think it does. It makes the criminals smarter. It makes them understand exactly how. You don't know how easy some criminals, how smart some criminals are. Just telling them, you're monitoring with ChatGPT, will make them so small. It make them think about a lot more things that'll make it harder for you to monitor them the next time they commit crimes. So that's why there's so many cold cases around in the world. Some people are very, very smart. Some criminals are very, very smart. And if the cops always tell them exactly how, they got this person, they got that person, the people slowly try to figure out, the criminals slowly try to figure out how to get around that. They try to figure out how, to get around all the ways that you guys monitor them. But I guess sometimes, it may be illegal to actually not tell people, tell the world exactly how, because some states actually have some sort of, have some laws that prevent cops from hiding the secrets, just so that, the cops aren't doing shady things behind the scenes, just so that, the cops aren't turning into criminals and hiding it because, because of their own, their ability to hide, facts. They hide the facts, they hide facts that prove that they're criminals as well. So that's something, you should be thinking about. Should cops tell everyone, how they committed how they found criminals, how they investigate crimes? Should cops tell the world how they investigate crimes, just so that the future criminals know exactly how the cops investigated their crimes and try to find ways around it? Or should cops keep it a secret? Should cops keep it a secret? But at the same time, you have to then, well, even if they keep it a secret, they can keep it a secret amongst themselves, you know. But they can also, there's a way to keep something a secret that, that doesn't involve, hiding their crimes. They can still keep it a secret. They can have like a privacy policy where, as long as the cops amongst themselves, they can review every single, crime, every single step that went into solving the crime. But the general majority are incapable of figuring it out. Are incapable of getting access to it. The cops and the government in general, like people like the governors and senators, they may be they can have access to the investigation materials, but people in general, the rest of the population, shouldn't have access to it. So there's also that way of doing it. But do you think cops should tell everyone how they committed how they solved their crimes? That way, future criminals can understand exactly what went on, and how to make changes to their future crimes. Or should cops, keep their investigation process a secret? But that's something to think about. I'll talk to you guys in the next episode. Have a great day.